Welcome to the Fabrice show. I'm really excited for this particular episode as we are jumping into a series titled Thinking About the Future. I bring three guests who I have the privilege to call friends as well in my community as we explore distinct topics that can help us really start to build a language around how to think about the future. These three guests, Daniel Friesen, Jodie Geddes, Martin Roeck, they bring a diverse myriad of experiences from education, technology, activism, linguistic, gaming, restorative justice, and even intergovernmental experiences. And each background that they bring forth in this conversation, I think dynamizes the conversation. Because traditionally in the Fabrice show, I usually bring guests, we have conversations, or I do lectures about specific topic, but this one is like a round table. And I'm really excited in this three-part series where the three episodes are going to be first the role of the imagination in society, which you're about to listen to. Secondly, we'll explore mental well-being. And then lastly, designing a sustainable democracy. And for this episode, I think, for me, I believe deeply that the imagination is at the center of everything in our world. From our policies, the laws, our cars, and who imagined how cars could be, our constitution, how everything is designed, how our modern innovations, our modern companies, our modern movements. The imagination is at the center of everything around us. Wherever you are right now, look around. Anything that is man-made, I would say, has its roots in the imagination. It took multiple people, it took groups of communities, it took forces of nature in a mind to mold it into action, to create it. And I hope at the end of this episode, I really want to show you that as individuals, we have the opportunity to reimagine everything around us, and the times that we live in demands it. Imagination is at the heart of our spirituality and our ability to own ourselves and for us to exist together as species. It is what inspires us to find meaning, to find community, to find growth. Imagination is tied to our human dignity, to how we have and engage our mental health, how we engage ourselves as citizens of a nation, of a global world. Imagination is tied to how we need to shape inclusive processes, to reject the old, to reimagine the past, to understand that possible futures is within our grasp. Imagination is also tied to how we heal, how we tap into our heart center. It's also how we connect to nature. It's also how we tap into all the times, all the possible times, past, present, and future. I think the problem of the 21st century is that our imagination has deeply atrophied. And that's impacted our communities because we're not able to connect the dots anymore. We're not able to tap into a shared past that we have to those who feel and think differently than us. I believe that if we were to open our imagination, not only within ourselves and also in the spaces that we foster, it can really be a gateway that inextricably opens the destiny that binds us together as humans. Whether we're from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe, from places in Oakland to Miami to Alaska, from everywhere around the world, we have an inextricable destiny. And I think imagination is a profound right as human in our society that I don't think that we practice. I think a lot of people categorize it as soft power, as something that's unimportant. I want to challenge you today to be more imaginative in your life, to really wrestle with what does it mean to be imaginative, to have imagination, to use it in your day to day, instead of existing passively, as I feel society almost kind of forces us to be, in this sort of numbness that comes with modern society. So, without further ado, I am excited for this conversation. I'm excited for this three-part series about thinking about the future. This is specifically around the role of imagination in society. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy.
Hi, my name is Jodie.
I'm Daniel.
Hi, this is Martin.
Hi, this is Fabrice, and welcome to the Thinking About the Future, a segment of the Fabrice Garrier Show. I'm excited to bring on new co-hosts and dynamize our conversation here. We'll be talking about the role of the imagination and society, something so critical and important that I think it can really change radically everything about our world if we take it into account. Now we'll do the presentations. So whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. I have been thinking about this issue, um, the role of imagination in society, for a while. I think it's a very important thing for people to be creative and innovative in general. And this study kept popping up on my research feeds. It's from the Ohio State University. Dr. Fletcher has this project narrative, and the idea is that they're trying to find a way, a new method for training people to be creative. And Fabrice, you'll like this. The way that they found that is most effective in fostering creativity in people is to ask them to think about alternative stories for events. So it sounds like it's training creativity through telling stories in the way that young children are creative. Um, they uh, they develop new worlds in the mind and flesh those out. And the idea is not to predict the future, but to imagine alternative realities. And that sounds a lot like imagination in society. And this technique is become really popular, and it's now being used by the army and by a few colleges and by a few Fortune 500 companies to train creativity in these places. So I thought that was an interesting look into how research and business are thinking about creativity and imagination today.
Thank you. It's like so incredible and powerful to think about. Can't wait to dive in a little bit more on that. Who wants to go next?
Actually, thank you for that, Daniel. It's making me think a lot about Adrienne Marie Brown, and a lot of her work, and how, as an author, a doula, a feminist, a lot of her work is inspired by Octavia Butler, that does a lot of writing around speculative fiction and what some would consider Afrofuturism. How do we create space to imagine? And I think, on one hand, also recognize the future that we seek to create in many ways exists, and we have to go on a journey to get there. It's much larger than that, I will say. But as you were sharing, Daniel, it just reminded me of Adrienne Marie Brown's work, and a piece that I've been really reflecting on, called Radical Gratitude Spell. What does it mean to be enough, and what does it mean to be sacred, um, as human beings? And I think that is at the essence of how we imagine and create whatever world or worlds are coming next. So it's interesting how I've been pondering on that. And then that was your reflection. So thank you.
Super.
Yeah, I think it's super powerful to think about what imagination is and what the role it plays in society. For me, it really is. It's all the same, whether it's imagination, creativity, innovation, critical thinking. I think it's all about not living in the moment, but seeing something that's different, seeing something that's better. So critical thinking meaning reflect on what we have. What is a way to do that better? And that's the same if you apply creativity or innovation in a corporate setting or looking at a societal process or looking at the world as a whole. One thing that I found in a research, I think it was a few years ago, a quote that really stuck with me is to say that anyone can be creative. You just have to want to do it. So it's about wanting to be creative. You can take a pen and you can write down right now. You can draw something, you can sing something, nothing stops you. And it's the same with imagination and society. I think as a society, we can flex our creative muscles in different areas, in different discourses. And I think this podcast is part of that. So we have a discourse around a better future. That's imagination. And we're playing a role in society because we're putting it out into the world. So we are actually enacting the topic that we're talking about. So I'm very excited about that.
Super. Thank you. The thing that I want to present for me is an Albert Einstein quote. And I think it's very popular and a lot of people know it, but he says, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. I think that is such an incredible piece of statement, not only because it comes from Albert Einstein, who's a scientist, because I think there's always been sort of this attachment or this sort of this it's sort of like this corruption of understanding when you're so attached to what is real, what is true, what is fact, and what is happening right now. And I feel in our current state of the world, a lot of what we see and what we understand to be has come from the past. It has come from a world that's decaying. It's come from a world that's been reinvented. It's come from a world that is exponentially growing. So like the question that I would love to even start with, or even if you all have questions as well, is just like, how do we even expand like people's imagination or collective imagination? Why is imagination even important? Because I think like a lot of the problems we face today, especially leaders, whether it's from the World Economic Forum in Davos to big tech companies or to leaders in African nations, to activists underground in New York or Oakland, I feel like so much of our world, to move towards change, you have to imagine it first and you have to be able to get people together. It's like, why is it so like people, how do we expand people's imagination? What's the problem? Why is the world not moving in the direction that we want it to be?
Yeah, I think that's an important question to keep it real because I'm a transparent person. Um, I think that in the vision or imagining of the world to come or wherever people want the direction to go, I think we have to approach it with the mindset of the beloved community. I was in a great meeting the other day, actually a training with some incredible folks. And one of the things that someone named that was really this moment, another moment of enlightenment, was really thinking about in the beloved community, we often talk about people we already are in relationship with, people that we share things with, people that we love. But what about those that we might see as our enemies? Right. And I think a part of the vision for the future, even when, like back in some cultures, people say pray for your enemies, right? And often take that very serious. And so what does it mean in whatever world we seek to create and the imagining of that? We are really engaging in ways that call folks in, even if they might not we might not be there yet in our own learning, in our own thinking. What does it mean for your enemies to be a part of the beloved community? And honestly, during where we are, I wouldn't even say politically, I just think where we are as a nation and where we are as a world, how do we create space to really see each other as full human beings? And I don't think that lacks accountability. I think what often happens is folks don't believe those two things can exist at once, right? So I can hold someone accountable for their actions and I can still see them as a full human being without making them disposable. And so in that question, I'm thinking just a lot about this idea of what does it mean to pray for your enemies? And I think it also means imagining your enemies. This is a hard one. Imagining your enemies as a part of that word you want to create. So I'm speaking this out loud, but I'm also challenged by this as a Black woman with so many other identities walking through what we call the United States.
That's pretty powerful. It makes me think about the role of a supportive community in being creative or imaginative. I think it's difficult to be imaginative and to think about new possibilities and things like that when you're really bogged down with the day-to-day tasks, or you're in kind of a scarcity mode where you're just looking to exist. So I think the role of a supporting community that helps you take care of those needs and in some way allows you that freedom to explore new possibilities and things like that. So it makes me think of.
I guess that also raises the question of power structures, right? I think we have a society where certain people are encouraged to dream, are encouraged to imagine, or are put in places where they can imagine, and others are not. And then there are subgroups, there are different spaces, different places where people imagine. But just thinking about the most powerful imagination is maybe it's Congress, maybe it's the Senate, maybe it's where the legislations are drawn. That's where people imagine from a societal perspective where the money is going. They imagine something when they allocate those resources, right? That's maybe the most prominent way to imagine. But of course, that is one space of power where certain groups of people are overrepresented and others are not. But society is way more than that. We imagine things in movies. We imagine things in books. We imagine things every day as we walk around. We imagine, and as we imagine, we create. As we're talking to people, as we're acting our lives. And I think that's a powerful way to restructure that. And maybe that's a question of culture, of community, of conversations, of public discourse. How are people represented in movies? Who is the president that launches the nuclear weapons in those war movies? Who is the person giving people a better future? Who is the person that we allow to imagine in those spaces? Who do we shush if they imagine? Who do we call childish when they dream? How do we change that?
So I think we all agree that every person has the capacity to be imaginative and creative. At least I hope we agree on that. One thing that I found in doing a little bit of research is that that the ability of children to perform creative tasks drops after 4 or 5 years of schooling. It's when kids start to do like logical memory training, things like that, and they become much more linear in their approach to the world. And other studies have shown that children are more imaginative, more creative than adults. So there seems to be, if we talk about power process or whatever, as a society, I don't know how much we value imagination. And it might do us some good to consider the ways that we're brought up to stop imagining.
Yeah, that's a powerful point. And I like what you said earlier as well around like people that are living in, like, for example, poverty or have trauma, or even as a Black person in America, like navigating white spaces. It's almost as if it's like my imagination. It's like it's dangerous for me to imagine. And and it almost feels like in terms of the power structures, it's like there is an intention. The intention is to get people to be part of the cog and be part of the wheel and make this nation state forward. It's almost as if the way the systems are incentivized or designed in such a way that it doesn't value creativity and imagination, and it sort of strips people of those inherent freedoms. So like I almost wonder, it's like, where do we go from here? If the world outside of us has so much influence on our thinking and our mind, like, and I almost want to say also, I feel like there's almost different types of imagination. Yes, there's political imagination. Yes, there is personal imagination, creativity. There's critical imagination. There's so much in terms of the paradigms of like stretching and augmenting our meaning structures that can yield innovations and better realities. And I love what Jodie said around the enemy, because I think so much time, like the media or the stories, we have the protagonist and we have the antagonist, and there has to be, like, it almost seems like there has to be the enemy, and then we have to sort of play a role And I think it was this famous book called Caste by Wilkerson. It talks about like how black people and white people and people from different cultures in America are like almost casted into a role. And like history sort of defines those racialized boundaries and how we live our lives. So I feel like, yeah, there's just so much to unpack, and like it's like, how do we like it does it even make sense to does it even make sense to have more imaginative people? Like, what does that mean? Like, yeah, I'm just gonna pose that question, or any reflection or thoughts or reaction to anything that was said so far.
I'll real quick. It makes what you were sharing, Fabrice. It makes me think about um, kind of pedagogy of the oppressed, right? And the use of theater of the oppressed to imagine like revolutionary change in a country. Like that was a real thing, right? And this idea around like art imitating life, life imitating art. So I think that and there's always a place for imagination. And even on the very basic level, there's always a place for imagination. And even on the very basic level, thinking about the airplane, right? Someone had to imagine how that would take them from one location to another. I think all of that is a part of imagination. We just don't often see it in that way. I think a part of that is kind of neuroscience, this idea of left brain, right brain, although new studies are like refuting that, right? And this side is more creative and this side is more logical. And the reality is those things are in relationship with each other. And so I think it's the same way, even when we talk about the different types of imagination, I think that they're also in relationship with each other. I don't think that they are separate. I personally believe that imagination on some level is a part of everything. Now, I feel like the language of manifestation is maybe taking over imagination a little bit, but we're not going to debate about that right now. So I don't know. I think it shows up in different ways, but on some level, we're always kind of imagining. There might just be other words to describe that. I think imagination, though, can go to another level where it is imagination that leads to some type of transformation, right? Whether that's transformation in our lives or whether that's transformation in some kind of structure or system, right? So moving away from what people might identify as daydreaming to this something that is more action oriented. And I think daydreaming is also a beautiful thing. What does it mean for the mind to wonder and ponder? I think that's also important. I hope that was clear, and it's totally okay if it's not.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that you said, Fabrice. Is it even worth imagining, or what? You asked like, are we even supposed to imagine things? Uh, and it seems to me that there's an inequality in who should be imagining. So I work with immigrant groups, working at packing sheds and things like that. And I don't know what it would be like for them, like in their job. They should not be imaginative. At least that's the idea. They're supposed to be um, people who come to the plant and perform a very specific duty. Now, when you get higher up in the chain and you get to executive levels, things like that, those people are expected to be more imaginative. And uh, more and more, we see that that jobs are demanding that type of creativity, that type of imagination. But if you're, I don't know what the place is in society for somebody who isn't imaginative. It seems like they're doomed to take lower jobs that have the possibility of being automated. So when we ask about the role of imagination in society, I think it's more crucial than ever that we think about ways to foster that creativity early, because it demonstrates a certain capacity to work in the ways that things are being built now, which requires a certain amount of flexibility and creativity. And things change so quickly now, new technology, new platforms, things like that. You need that imaginative capacity to keep up, I think.
Definitely. Oh, go ahead, Martin.
No, I was just going to add that I think imagination can play an important role, but I also don't necessarily think that anyone needs to be creative or imaginative. I think that's a personal choice. And I think it can also be a choice to say, I'm happy in a job where I don't have to be creative. I'm happy doing something where I don't have to think. Thinking about people who join the military. And then you're not asked to be creative, you're asked to follow orders as efficiently as possible. Um, I'm not saying people should join the military, but I'm saying there are other jobs that are maybe similar where it can also be a relief not to have to make creative decisions. And I think that should be accepted. Like if you want to be a bus driver, taking kids to school, and you have a joy doing that, go ahead and do that as long as you get a decent wage. So I think separating that need to imagine from income, I think maybe that's a separate discussion. But I totally agree that I think this question of imagination also, we're talking about imagination from a societal perspective, but it also really immediately connects to personal imagination. Like, how do you imagine your own role? Is it in a choice that you make in an aware setting? Or to what extent is that role that you're imagining for yourself given to you by others? Like, to what extent do you think that what you can do is your choice as opposed to something that others give you? And I think that connects directly to a political action, because often people think that they're not in a position to demand a better wage, for example, at their workplace. They're not in a position to demand something better for themselves, to even demand to be seen in a certain way. Whereas when you start doing it, you notice that, hey, this is actually okay, depending on the situation, obviously. But I think that kind of reframing of how we see ourselves in so many ways is very powerful. And I think I don't know the answer to how that could be done, but I think just strengthening those muscles and increasing awareness of people that there are choices you can make in how you live, and that there are things that are given to you, but you can choose to live differently. I think that in itself can be extremely powerful.
So I'm interested to get your feedback. What do you think enables us to imagine new things? So we experience things in our daily life, right? And I think that we can imagine about those things that we see. But we seem to be able to also imagine things that we haven't seen yet. And is that a matter of combining things that we've experienced already? Is that inspiration from somebody else? What is at a more fundamental level the way that we imagine new things? How do we get there?
I think I'll respond real quick because I would love to hear from you, Fabrice, because I feel like there's a lot going on in your mind. I'll say, I think at a very basic level, our lives require us to be imaginative, especially when we're talking about like in relationship to creativity, because you have to think about another path towards solving a problem and issue. This is like at the very basic level. I don't think expanding across like particular fields and disciplines, right? So if my car breaks down, I have to find a solution to that thing, right? I have to think about the multiple possibilities that allows me to get to that place. And I think sometimes imagination and creativity might only be seen in relationship to certain fields like art, right? Different forms of art. And I'm saying this as a challenge to myself when I talk about everyone's ability to imagine, right? For me, I see that across a large spectrum. And some of that just means the everyday task of, okay, now you woke up, you have 5 minutes to get out the door, you have some choices to make, right? Are you going to like brush your teeth? Or are you going to grab that muffin and leave? I mean, I would hope that one would brush your teeth instead. But I'm just saying, even on that small level, I think it might not be the glamorous imagination that one thinks of, but is that a form of imagining? I don't know. Or maybe I do. But I'm saying that as even a pushback onto myself around my own view of imagination, because if I hold that view of imagination, of course, with the all types of other views of imagination, then I also see the role of those folks who might not see themselves in quotations as creatives. I also see their role in kind of thinking about where do we go next as a society, as a nation.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates with me so much, and that's such a powerful question. I feel like for me, when I look at this, it's almost as if I have to go inside myself. I have to see that, like, just on the most basic sense, like I'm born and raised in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, but and I'm also American, and what does that mean for me in terms of those identities? And I feel like those identities that are inside of me almost take a life of their own when I'm imagining. And I almost and personally, I almost feel like this sort of imagination rises from the complexity that is inside the human mind. Or Carl Jung talks about it as like the sub personalities. It's like, what are the millions or thousands or hundreds of identities, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a sculptor, a tech person, or an activist? What are those various identities inside of us that are dancing and growing and moving and engaging together? I feel like the more that we grow inside, we magnify this sort of inner life, this inner world, or self understanding or emotional intelligence. I think the more we're able to imagine possibilities. And I like what Jody said as well. It's like people don't consider themselves as artists, as creative. And I'm a big advocate to say, like, right now, the world, we have extreme crises that are happening in our planet right now, whether it's climate change, whether it's like on the brink of war, whether it's like mental health, depression. We have all these things that are happening. So I think we should automate these jobs away. And I know that sounds really bad to say, Daniel, but to respond to what you're saying, if a job doesn't allow you to, this idea that what you said, Martin, about like people not wanting to be creative or imaginative, I think that's by design. I think there is a robust intention, and it's not an accident, and it's being very intentional to create and mold the mind in such a way that we believe that we just don't want to be imaginative. I think it's true, yes, you don't have to be imaginative all the time, and there's a way you can relax and just like enjoy life and like go out with friends. But I do feel like in the times that we are living right now, we do need more imaginative people from the bottom up, not just like the rich and the execs or the leaders. I think we need people from the bottom up, whether it is from brushing your teeth or grabbing that bagel. I think it's sort of like reconceptualizing a lot of these things, because I think the times demand it, or future demands it. And I think the role of imagination in society is is extremely critical in terms of addressing these issues that I feel like nobody knows what the heck we're doing. We're just sort of like moving with the flow of things. We're trying things, we're doing things, but yeah.
So I want to take this to leadership a little bit. It seems like the leader, typically in an organization or in a group, is the one that is imagining the pathway forward and then is telling other people how to move towards that direction, more or less, maybe. So if people underneath the leader are also imaginative, how does that change organizations and structures? It seems like we have very well-defined roles, especially at the bottom of organizations, for a reason. These are jobs that need to get done, no creativity or imagination necessary or involved. So what do we do? What do we do if everybody in the organization is enabled to be more creative or imaginative? How does that help or how does that hurt?
I think from an organizational perspective, imagination ties into innovation. So even the person who just files paperwork, which, as Fabrice says, might be a good job to get rid of in the future, but even that person is creative in the way that they find effective ways of doing that better. So I think that's imagination, that's creativity. And I guess that goes back to this thought of anyone can be creative. Anyone, if they want to do a better job and they're thinking about how to do a better job, they can do that. Of course, I think you also raised that question of how does that trickle up to that leadership level, and I guess two angles to look at that. The one is, well, that kind of leadership model of one person on the top and everyone else following, maybe that is also outdated. Maybe we need to reimagine that. And then the other way to say is there are ways to tap into that creativity in spaces. So maybe that's a question: how do you create that space in an organizational setting to say, once a month, everyone comes together and everyone has an equal voice, and we're going to think about how, as an organization, we can do a better job. How can we imagine this organization being better at what it does? So I think there are processes that one can reflect on, and I think it's also such a broad thing to think about without specifics of who the people are, who the community is there, and what this organization does. But yeah, I think for me, imagination in that setting just means imagining a better workplace, and that needs to include everyone who is in that space.
I think I agree with that. I'm curious if you think that. So earlier you said, Martin, that some people might not feel necessarily like they need to be imaginative or they don't need to be creative. Do other people on the panel think that flexing your imaginative muscle is something that is like life-giving or beneficial in some way, or is it just another something that you can choose to do, not choose to do? It's not necessarily better or worse than not being imaginative.
I can jump in real quickly. I think this relates to what I was saying earlier. I think it's a spectrum. I think there's a space where there's like constant engaging with imagining to like move through the world. You have to problem solve, take moments to reflect whether or not one is conscious. And then I think there is the imagining where space is created to really be intentional, right? Like when people talk about manifestation, what does it mean to journal? What does it mean to meditate? Or whatever ways people are deciding they want to manifest out here in these streets. So I think that so for me, I think all of it moves across a spectrum. And I will say too, just to kind of what Daniel, you and Martin were saying, I work at a nonprofit organization and we have someone in leadership that I feel like is very imaginative. We'll be in a meeting, they say one thing and it happens what feels like the next week, which probably takes a longer period of time. But I even imagine or remember being in a staff meeting and our executive director talked about going to South Africa. And I do a lot of restorative justice work, of course, with an Afrocentric indigenous lens. So it made sense to be in community with folks. Said it in a meeting. A few weeks later, we were buying tickets. Our full staff went, right? Thinking about the follow through of that process and many other things that followed a part of their vision. And while in my role, I'm promoting and growing the vision of the organization, there's also still space for me to imagine. And I also recognize that many other folks don't have that space, right? So I think that creating space for people to imagine and contribute to the vision, I think leads to less turnover and more satisfaction amongst your employees, right? And I think that there's a way everyone can contribute to the vision, but I think it also means letting go of some power. And so organizationally, there are conversations our young people are part of that at many organizations, people would be like, oh, that's not for children, right? But here's this learning experience, but they're also full human beings who have something to contribute that we might not be seeing as those who are considered adults. So I think while I'm in this nonprofit space, I also have so much opportunity to imagine and to vision, even as a part of our kind of grant writing processes, development of programming. I mean, my first 3 months when I first initially entered into the organization, I had the ability to create a curriculum that was called Dreaming Out Loud, right? That really used things like speculative fiction and these other forms of what we can say imagination, for young people to think about what does it mean to end youth incarceration, this thing that they were born in and it's here. And so it's hard to even imagine the dismantling of that. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but I say all to say I think that it is a spectrum. And so there's a space where I feel like there's constant problem solving, and then I think there's a space around imagination where you have to create an opportunity to really pause. And what is it that we are imagining about? How do we create a container to really sit and to really think about it? And I believe that many people don't have that opportunity. And in my restorative justice work, when I have an opportunity to sit down with people for them to name things out loud, I see the transformation happening. because many people are not asked, like, what kind of community do you want to live in? Even like, is this what you wanted to do since you were a kid? If you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And most people are not saying the jobs that they're in, right? But there might not be an opportunity to reflect on that because it might seem like the path is already preordained for you based on who you are and where you come from. And the reality, there's redlining, all these structures in place that determine schools that people go to, and your parents get arrested because they just trying to send you to a school that they perceive to be better in a different district, right? So many things with college and access. So there are some real systemic things that design these pathways for people, even if they might want something else. And so what does it mean to create an opportunity for deeper reflection? And I don't think that means the lives that people are living is wrong, and they don't have to want to create a change. But I'm also thinking about this very spiritual and physical wellness of what it means to reflect on one's life and where they are and what it is that they want. Does that make sense? My tangent rabbit hole.
That makes total sense to me. I work with I do some workplace development stuff, so giving skills to people in the jobs that they're at, and sometimes we'll do some exercises about what are other places that you could work or that you could use some of these skills. And it seems like a lot of people haven't even considered, oh, I could work at a different place. Oh, I could work, I could use these skills and actually make money with it. It's very interesting to see how, the limits of what we think is possible, especially when it comes to utilizing our skills or thinking about the places that we want to work, that we want to go to. And I just want to back up your intuition there. It seems like studies say that creativity programs decrease turnover costs, training costs, keep company knowledge within the company, and increase the company's innovation. So that seems like pretty solid evidence for the benefit of imaginative or creativity programs within organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think everything that's been said, it resonates with me so deeply. I always, like in the Future Manifesto, I talk about like biomimetics. It's like, how do we look at systems from nature and reflecting those things? And when you look at systems, you see that all the parts, like for example, in the plant, are feeding into the information of the growth of the totality. So I even think that what Martin was saying around this sort of top down process is very much an old paradigm in our world. I think we have so many old paradigms that is carving out paths for people and processes and ways of thinking. I do feel like I totally agree. I think if more people are imaginative, creative in organizations, there's more buy-in into the vision. There's more innovation. There's more process. But like doing this on a collective scales, when we have like some of these deeper paradigms like capitalism, for example, that incentivizes so much of our workforce, or we have like our democratic process, how we come in and tell our ideas so we can advocate for change in our communities, or even how we understand history. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about decentralized autonomous organization. And he was trying to explain it to me. I've looked into it, but it's almost the idea that it's a group of people, organizations that is not necessarily controlled by a central government. So every single member has like ownership into the process. And I feel like that's a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at this sort of cooperative, collaborative, collective processes. And my pushback in this was like, even if we set up new systems or new ways of being in terms of the imagination, and I know we'll be talking about this in the future episodes in terms of democracy, the economy. So, but I do feel like a lot of the challenges in a world that still operates within the same paradigm, like Jody was saying, in terms of like, okay, I'm a Black person and I grew up in this area, and my family, one of my family members is incarcerated, or I've had these type of problems. It's like I can't imagine a better future, or a better way, or a way of doing things. But it's like my question to everyone here is like, how do we imagine, let's say, yes, we have the perfect education system. Yes, let's say we have in our innovative organizations, but that organization, that innovative person or that creative person, like still inhabits a world where everyone around them is still sort of operating in that same software. Like, how do you navigate a world where we are, I think we are in massive transitions in terms of paradigms of like, especially after the pandemic, people are just like sitting back and saying like, holy moly, I've my entire life I've gone to this pathway and I thought that's what I wanted to do. And or even like, oh, my entire life I believed in this sort of government process or this organization. Now people are taking a pause and saying like, it doesn't have to be the way that it's always have been. And I feel like for me, where I'm coming from is like, how do we push people to be more imaginative? Because I think we need to, no matter whether they want or not. I think people need to be imaginative. And I know I might get some pushback from that in terms of free will. And that might seem like, I think my friend was talking about this sort of the benevolent force action. And I feel like, how do we do that when the entire world is transitioning? And especially with technology, especially with the internet, especially in this new world where there's just so many truths and so many things are happening. But the key thing to do is just to revolve back to what we've always known, these old paradigms.
Do you think that being in diverse settings or being exposed to drastically different cultures or ideas increases your ability to be imaginative?
I totally think so. Is this a trick question? That's why I hesitated a little bit. But I want to hear from like Martin, Jody. What do you think as well? I think so. I think for me as an immigrant, I'm hungry for knowledge. Like, I feel like the more I learn, the more I realize there's less that I know, and there's a sort of humility that comes to that. It's almost like faces, like, I don't think that I know everything, and it's because of having met different cultures and different people. And it's almost as if it's like, I feel like in the continuum of the spectrum that we've been talking about, the imagination spectrum, I feel like there's dogma and then there's like anti-dogma. I think the more imaginative you are, the less dogmatic you can be. But I do feel you can still be dogmatic in certain areas of your life and still be imaginative in other areas. But I do feel like this multicultural, different pathways, different understandings of different cultures and beings and languages, I would say magnifies. It's less homogeneous in a way.
Yeah, I'm just asking because, like, in my experience, pushing my imaginative abilities to the limit, like when I try to draw something from imagination, for instance, I'm always depressed at how little or how unimaginative it seems, because it seems like I'm always drawing from something very familiar. And one thing I feel like increases the limits of my imagination is like going on Pinterest and looking at really crazy, uh, really crazy images, or looking at the dress of very different cultures, and that allows me to imagine new possibilities, pathways that I could never generate on my own.
Absolutely. I feel like for me that resonates a lot with me as well. Though I do feel like I have a lot of outlets to be quote unquote creative, like whether I pick up a guitar, and I know you're a musician as well, Daniel. It's like you pick up a guitar, you start to imagine a different way. Or I force myself to think in French for the day, for example. It's like there's always like a way to just kind of get dislodged. And I think we'll be talking about mental health as well in the future episodes. But I do feel like more imaginative people, you have greater level of like emotional intelligence to be able to deal or embrace all the emotions that sort of rises inside of us. And then we're sort of less reactionary and we're more comprehensive in how we move and navigate the world.
I would love to see a study on that. I'm just gonna make that clear. I do not want to make. I'm not adopting that assumption. I would not say that I want to force people imaginative. I think what I will say though is I think that there is more room when young children are learning to have more creative spaces. I think about my own pressure as a new parent, my own pressure around, my child not even being 1 year old and trying to do flashcards with her. I mean, I know some of that is like deeply embedded in some other stuff, but trying to do educational flashcards with her, listening to so many sources about what is the best way of learning, internalizing things that aren't really important beyond her being safe, right? And her being happy. And I think there are a lot of other parents who carry that. And one of my colleagues and an incredible Black woman that I really admire in many ways, she talked about her own child's experience in kind of what was her child's preschool that really consisted of them playing in dirt and having fun. And her kids are incredibly intelligent little humans. And so I'm thinking just a lot about how to create space for children just to have fun and not carry this burden or pressure around performing, right? As a young person who at 6 years old had planned my life out that I was going to have a BMW, move to Chicago and become a lawyer. I had this life planned, right? And I'm thinking about that was a product of some other pressures that existed for me. And even as someone who is a creative, right? I'm a writer, right? I'm a poet first, started writing at 6 years old, but it never occurred to me, not because I didn't believe this was possible, but it never occurred to me that my life could just be writing poems. And I know many people who are successful from writing poems and leaning to their art, and their college professors and PhDs in literature, right? These possibilities that exist, but and maybe I had internalized it being in opposition to something else. So I really think it's important to name that. And the last thing I'll say, and this came up earlier as I heard Martin sharing, I'm thinking a lot about, I'm pretty sure I'm remembering this correctly, and I'll try to find a link, like years ago on Good Morning America or some other morning show where they were showing young children a red square. And the kids were naming all these different things that the square could be. And I reflect on this all the time because the adults, they couldn't name more than 5 items. And it was very logical. It's red. It's a square. It has 4 sides. And the children were like, it's a boat. There's a Ferris wheel. There were these ways that they were really thinking and so creative with it. And I think a lot about what it means to hold on to those pieces of their identity, hold on to those pieces of their thoughts. And so, yeah, those are just one of the things that come up for me.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. I like what the angle you're talking about in terms of children and thinking and growth and understanding. It's almost as if it's like that. My question is, I guess, is it too late then for us? Is it too late for as humans or as adults? I turned 30 last year, and I guess I'm like thinking myself as an adult now. But is it too late for as you grow older to imagine and to grow? Because I think we've talked so much about young people and the younger generation. I wonder, like, is there a point where we start to hold these dogmas in a way?
I don't think it's too late. I think what we're seeing right now in the wake of the pandemic is people are letting go. They're like, oh, I thought this thing was for me. We got into the twilight zone. I'm having an awakening. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that different articles from New York Times, Washington Post might say something different, but I think many people are having an awakening around the kind of life that they want to live that isn't about going to sleep, waking up and doing the same thing over and over again. And if that's what you want to do, that's okay. That's basically my life. But I think for many people there is an awakening of what is possible that maybe there wasn't space to really slow down and think about. So I'll just offer that quickly.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a place for cities or communities to create spaces just to imagine or just to reflect on where they're at. It seems like we're in kind of a hustle culture. We like to go from thing to thing to thing. We have to be productive. We have to show that we're productive, and that's kind of a whole industry in itself. So I wonder if there's a space for, or a space that could be created, and I wonder if there's demand for places people can go just to play with things, just to be imaginative in the ways that reconnect with the past, the past imagination and creative capacity they had as children. I think there is I think there's a need for that, and I think people can recognize. Isn't that what nostalgia is? Isn't there's a nostalgia of a time before when you had more freedom or more creative, you had more pathways in front of you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I wanted to give a plug for, I wrote a little book called Breaking Free from Mass Produced Consciousness. And a lot of the premise is really looking at some of these like semiotics and like symbolic structures inside of us. It's like, how do we take hold and control? Because I think as the future accelerates and as the world moves more into the media, this sort of hyper real, I think we are going to find more people who are going to be lost. And I think we are going to find more need for spaces to imagine and to disconnect, to unplug. Because I think, like, as humans, our evolution, our next stage of evolution, I always say is going to happen in our imagination. I think this has been such an incredible, incredible conversation. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I always say that. And I appreciate you, all of you as co-hosts in this endeavor. We have a full season 3 ahead of us. And I would love to go around and just hear your final thoughts. If you could share, it could be something that was talked about during the call. It could be something that you're thinking about right now. In the context of, like, what is one of the most important thing that you think that listeners should pay attention to in terms of the imagination? So yeah, we'll just go around and then we'll close.
Important for people to recognize that they have the capacity within themselves to be imaginative and to be creative. I think we forget that a lot of the time, and we're caught up in so many different things. We forget to take the time to explore, what are the different possibilities I imagine for myself. And I think that's in general a useful exercise and can reorient you and give you new perspectives.
I agree with Daniel and what Martin just shared. I think that as we move forward as a nation and also watch how other nations are moving, there's going to be a requirement to imagine maybe in a new way. So I look forward to the unexpected.
Absolutely. And I think my key takeaway is I challenge you. If you're a listener to this, I challenge you today, this moment, do something that you wouldn't otherwise do. Take a new class, learn a new skill, meet someone new, put yourself outside your comfort zone. Because I think engaging yourself in such a fundamental way is going to be how we can all be creatively imaginative in terms of this future, because the world desperately needs more imaginative people, I believe. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll stay tuned on the next episodes. And please share this with everyone. Cheers.